To all of you, I'm Barbara Cochran. I'm the president of the Radio Television News Directors Association, and we're so pleased to be co-hosting this event with Warner Independent Pictures, and we're also so very pleased that George Clooney, Grant Heslov, and David Strathairn could be here with us this evening. I hope that you've had a chance to see, or will have a chance to see, Good Night and Good Luck. Anyone who cares about history and the future of journalism will want to see this film. We're delighted to be co-hosting, as I said, with Warner Independent Pictures. And I'd also like to introduce two of our leaders, our board leaders, who are here with us tonight. They are Dan Shelley, who is our RTNDA board chairman and news director of WTMJ AM in Milwaukee. Speech. And also Bob Priddy, who is chairman of our Educational Foundation and news director of MissouriNet in Jefferson City, Missouri. And Bob is also our historian and is really the connection to how we got involved with this movie. If you've had a chance to attend one of the screenings of Good Night and Good Luck, you can understand why the Radio Television News Directors Association took a special interest in this film. The film begins and ends with a famous and often quoted speech made by Murrow at the 1958 RTNDA convention. And today, nearly half a century later, RTNDA still fights for the same freedoms and upholds the same standards that Murrow stood for. We represent more than 3,000 news executives and staff working in radio, television, and other electronic media at network and local levels in the United States and 30 countries around the world. And many of you who are here tonight are RTNDA members, and we're really glad to see you here. RTNDA's ties to Murrow go back a long way and continue to this day. Murrow was one of the earliest recipients of RTNDA's highest honor, the Paul White Award, which is named for the first news director of CBS News. RTNDA led the fight to get Murrow's likeness on a U.S. postage stamp. And our annual award for excellence in news coverage is called the Edward R. Murrow Award. I even have Murrow's application for RTNDA membership framed in our office. And for those of you who are RTNDA members, you should know that he paid $10 in dues. It's a little more than that now. So perhaps it's not surprising that seeing Good Night and Good Luck made me wonder what Murrow would think about what's going on today. What would he say about a reporter for the New York Times who today marks her 76th day in jail for refusing to disclose the source of a story she never even wrote? Or what would he say about a Providence, Rhode Island television reporter who endured 4 months under house arrest, also for refusing to name a confidential source? Would Murrow be surprised that this many years later, television and radio coverage is still barred from the highest court in the land? Would he be alarmed by the curtain of secrecy that shuts off more and more information from the public? And on a positive note, would he recognize his worthy successors in the countless television and radio journalists who brought the true story of Hurricane Katrina to the American people and finally galvanized governments at all levels into action? I know our speakers tonight may get into some of these issues, and now it's time to hear from them. And to moderate the discussion, I'm delighted to introduce someone who knew Edward Murrow well enough to call him Ed, and who was, in fact, the last correspondent hired by Murrow at CBS News. Marvin Kalb was a correspondent at CBS and NBC for 30 years, serving as Moscow bureau chief, chief diplomatic correspondent, and host of Meet the Press, which was where I got to know Marvin as his executive producer, so it's nice to be reunited with him tonight. In 1987, Marvin returned to Harvard, his alma mater, to found the Joan Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy. Since 1999, he has been a senior fellow at the Shorenstein Center, and he continues to write books and to lead discussions such as tonight's on the role of media in our democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marvin Kalb and our speakers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Barbara, very much. And I never called him Ed, I called him Sir. I don't know a single television reporter in this country for whom the name Edward R. Murrow is not a legend beyond reach. And yet Murrow, for those of us who worked with him, was very human, very vulnerable, incredibly decent, and a superb, unafraid reporter. When he hired me in June 1957, he took 2 tall glasses out of the desk drawer and a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label, and he started pouring. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and I must have had a look of absolute horror on my face. Murrow looked up and he said, "Oh dear, you don't drink." "No," I replied. "Does that mean there's no job?" "No," he said, "but it does make it more difficult." He's quite a guy. Let me quickly introduce our panel and get right into our discussion. On my right is the director, co-writer, and one of the stars of the movie, Good Night and Good Luck, George Clooney, one of my family's favorite actors. He was a journalism student in college. His dad was an anchorman for 25 years, so journalism is very much in Clooney's blood. In the movie, Clooney plays the role of Fred Friendly, who was Murrow's producer and right arm. On my left, David Strathairn, a very accomplished actor who plays Murrow, and whose cadence in speaking Murrow's lines is so remarkably true to life that at one point in my second viewing of the movie this week, I closed my eyes and just listened, and it was Ed. I mean, it's a remarkable performance, and you've already won, I think, one award in Europe for your acting in this movie, and I'm quite sure other awards will follow. And finally, to my immediate right is Grant Heslov, who is the producer and with Clooney the co-writer of the movie. He's the president of a movie production company. He's been a director and an actor in the movies and on television, and he's currently directing a 10-part HBO series based on the Ten Commandments. Okay, my first question is to George Clooney. Tell us, George, briefly about the movie and why you did it.
Briefly?
Briefly.
Well, my father's an anchorman. We've had some of this conversation with some of you already. My father, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, or across the river in Kentucky. And a big part of my growing up was, when you're a local anchorman, you're not making a lot of money, really. And my mom was working at the TV station as well. So from the time I was about 6 years old, our babysitter was WKRC in Cincinnati, and they would just drop us off. And my dad would go to do a radio show at WCKY for a couple hours, and my mom would be working on a show, the Bob Jones show, or one of the shows that was going on there. And I sort of we'd hang out at this TV station, and I became a cue card boy at 8 years old. I was operating cue cards. I was a floor director when I was 9 years old. I was operating the teleprompter for my dad's news at 11 years old, which is a funny thing. You'll remember this, but teleprompters at that time were, it was a IBM Selectric typewriter with a giant font, and you would, all of the stories were written out in huge pages, and then they would tape them end to end, and you would file them through with this camera over the top that would run. And at the commercial breaks, my dad would go, "Cut that Thursday's Child piece," and you'd literally cut a piece of paper out and tape it up and file it through, So it was a big part of my life, and what I remember most about it, and what I was most proud of my father about, was sitting on that floor watching him with good reporters like Deborah Dixon and Howard Ain, who were reporters in Cincinnati at the time, watching them each pitch their news story and say, "This is the lead story," and watching how a news broadcast at night was made, watching him fight on a local level to do national news, which isn't always easy in local broadcasting, watching the fights that he would have constantly with general managers, of course, as you know, always exist. Watching some of the most beautiful, bravest general managers, a guy named Bob Wiegand, stand up and fight for my dad's news program when Taft Broadcasting fired him for doing it. And it was a brave move because he knew he was going to get fired for it. Watching the constant battle of, this is 1969 or 1970, watching the constant battle of entertainment pushing news off the air, watching those fights. And Murrow, growing up in our household, Murrow and Cronkite were the two great heroes because they were the two men that you could point to two very specific moments in history that changed an American policy based on it. Murrow going at McCarthy, when people suddenly realized they weren't alone in their fear or their dislike of the policy. And when Cronkite went to Vietnam and he came back and said, this is at best a stalemate, and Johnson decides not to run for president because of that. That you could point to great sort of moments, and they were pinnacle moments in our family that were talked about. The Box of Lights and Wires speech that was done here, my dad used to recite to us as little kids. So I started revisiting it about 3 years ago when I started to see things that worried me. Not about news, although certainly there were issues about news, but there were also governmental issues, worries of using fear to start to erode away at civil liberties again, worries of not censorship, but people sort of self-censoring themselves because if you lose access, if you ask a tough question in a newsroom or in a presidential press conference, if you ask a tough question, you get sent to the back of the room and you lose access. And the dangers of trying to balance those things. And I thought it was an interesting time to talk about these again. I'm not a soapbox kind of guy. I don't believe in standing up and saying, this is right and this is wrong. It's so much more complex than that. We make Paley a very complex character. We don't make him a bad guy. We put him in a tough situation. I think all of these issues aren't black and white, but much more gray. And I miss some of the black and white issues, and that's why we did it.
David, let me ask you, you're quoted as saying you wanted to show what was going on in Murrow's head as you were exploring the role itself. Well, what did you find? What did you find in that head? What sort of person?
Vast. Saying those words over and over was not only an amazing privilege, but it was and an education, but it was an insight to a kind of will and integrity that I know exists in pieces of him, even in this room. But there was something I tried to give a sense that behind this seemingly languid, posed, at sometimes catatonic or relaxed guy who's sitting in the back of the room, that you could think, well, he's just having a nice day there with his cigarette. That behind that, there was this turbojet of intellect and analysis and editing and distilling and questioning going on. And to a large extent, the camera does that. Robert Ellsworth's camera catches those moments, like of many of us, candidly. But I came to feel that in this man, who you've known and many of you have met, that there was something very simple that was spawned in Polecat, North Carolina, and kept growing all the way through the lumberyard fields in Northwest, through the tutelage of Ida Lou Anderson, to the society tables of London, and I think it popped out publicly, or came and started pounding in his brain when he went to Birkenau, and returning with returning with a deep sense of the common man and the voice that is crying out there. And that's what I think he was committed to. And
You know, Murrow is the kind of reporter who, in World War II, during the London Blitz, went out to cover the Blitz in what way he took a microphone and put it very, very close to the ground as people were entering.
right, to hear the footsteps.
Just to hear the footsteps walking past.
Yeah.
And he would speak over that to give some sense to people of what was actually going on.
Yeah.
Grant, you were, as producer of this, you're doing a black and white movie,
Yeah.
Oops.
which is quite remarkable today. And you were using the actual words of Senator McCarthy. So he becomes a character in the movie.
He's a great actor in the film.
How did
You want to
work
take
that
out an ad for your consideration for Best Supporting Actor? You think it would be one of those great ads? Time magazine, he was riveting.
How did you work that out? That's most
Well,
interesting.
The black and white, George had always wanted to do the film in black and white. There was never really any discussion about it. We wanted to put people right in the period. And when we talked about who was going to play McCarthy, every time we talked about it, we felt that whoever we got to play the role, the audience would think that he was too arch and that he was overplaying it. And at some point, George just said, "You know what? Let's just use the footage." We'd been looking at the footage for years. I mean, as we researched, and
Technically, the footage at that time was what, 40 years old?
yeah.
Plus,
Or 50.
more than that.
Well, we went to CBS and we just started looking through the archives, and the kinescopes. It was everything was in every format, so it was a mess. So that took some time, and then once we actually got it, it was a question of just of restoring some of the footage to try to make it match our existing footage.
And make it match the story.
Yeah, that.
And put it in so that indeed he was a character almost answering direct questions.
But also, in a way, what we decided was Murrow's broadcast, which the genius of Murrow's broadcast was, when he went directly at McCarthy, was to use his own words. Because you can't rebut yourself. And that was brilliant, really, because he said, "What are you going to say? I didn't say that," and fight with yourself. So we thought the best thing to do in a time where there is some revisionist history about how maybe McCarthy was right, that are going around right now, we thought it was important to do that again and treat it like a journalist would, like my father would. He said, "Get the facts right, double source everything," and we did. And so we thought the best source of McCarthy was McCarthy.
No question you found the right source on that. But let me ask you a question about that, because it interested me. Given the arguments in contemporary journalism today, in other words, what is the proper role of a journalist in our society? If you go back to what Ed was doing at that time, he was very engaged in his story. He was not a detached observer.
He was editorializing, sure, in a way.
He was editorializing straight away, so that if an observer, a friendly observer, say of Fox News today, would
say,
look at what it is that you have done to the McCarthy character, could that person not feel, wait a minute, this guy was railroaded by a liberal media, run amok, crazy.
Well, there's no question about it. You could make the argument that he opened the door for editorializing, because television at that point had been rather timid. The Alsops, Herb Block, Jack Gould had all gone at him in the papers, gone at McCarthy, but no one had really faced it in television at that point. You could make a lot of those arguments. I would argue that the same argument that Murrow made, which was that the other side's been represented rather well, because he did have sort of a bully pulpit and was able to get on the air whenever he wanted to. And, Murrow was late to the game. He wasn't, he had a lot of good friends in New York going, "When the hell are you going to get in?" So it is, look, you're right. Again, it's not black and white. There are very difficult issues to talk about when you talk about the idea of editorializing, because it opens the door for some tremendously biased reporting.
But what,
David, go ahead. Sorry.
but he said, and it started with the Milo Radulovich program, that these are the words of Fred Friendly and myself.
Right.
This is not endorsed or supported or sanctioned by Alcoa or even the studio. So he said, from whence this comes. And I think what's happening today, you don't know from where it comes, whose agenda it is.
And also remember that it wasn't, as you know, it wasn't a news broadcast. It was a magazine show, for that matter. It wasn't, they weren't doing and tonight these are the things that happened. It was a once a week news show. So there was some room for editorializing, although
But as you were saying, there wasn't really any of that was going on
not before
at the
then.
time. It
No.
was very proper and correct. And Murrow was breaking the mold when he did this. And in your character, Bill Paley, who was not here among us,
Right.
but Bill Paley was justifiably concerned when he watched his #1 star breaking the mold.
Right.
And what is going to come of this? And what came of it was that Alcoa pulled out, and that it reached a certain point where Paley had to turn to Murrow and say, you're out as a weekly program on Tuesday night. You're going to give me 5 hours on Sunday
afternoon.
Which was regarded as the ghetto in television.
In many ways, the showdown between Murrow and McCarthy destroyed both of them, in many ways. In many ways, the fight was very similar. They didn't kick McCarthy out of the Senate. They censured him and stuck him in the back, let him sit back there and not talk. Not long after this, Murrow was sort of sent off to do much less at CBS until he really quit, until he just wasn't going to take it anymore. So there's some similarities in there and how it ended.
So it isn't as if in this great battle between the two giants, Murrow representing journalism and McCarthy representing an extreme form of American politics, that there was any winner.
I think that, well, that may be true. I always find that there's a winner because...
Who was the winner?
Well, I would say journalism, ultimately, in a way. I find that it is...
But journalism, George, just a minute. Journalism, how could you say was the winner? Because in the speech in Chicago,
right,
what Murrow is describing is an industry in despair.
But again, I always go back to this, which is, it's the Jefferson idea of given a free press or a free government, I'll take a free press.
Right.
He got to get up and say that. And, it wasn't very well received when he got up at to give the speech. It was sort of, they were kind of there to give him a gold watch, and it wasn't the nicest time for everybody. He pissed off Paley forever at that point. That was their
Frank Stanton.
And Frank Stanton from that point on. He was mad at Stanton because Stanton had told people that person to person was rehearsed, and he was a little angry at that along the way, at least from everything everyone told us. But I go back to the idea that it is about the diligence of reporting. I'm thrilled to be here because I have such respect for reporting, because I find that ultimately it is what writes history, it is what shapes opinion, it is everything, and he believed it. And it always loses its mind every 30 or 40 years. We go a little crazy. As a country, we go a little crazy every 30. We get bombed in Pearl Harbor, and then we grab all the Japanese Americans and throw them in detention camps because we're scared. And we come to our senses and we fix it. And what fixes it always, what leads the charge from burning witches at the stake to the civil rights movement to women voting to Vietnam, what leads the way always has been the freedom of the press and people in this room, journalists, always. And that has been the check and balance that is what is so important about the Fourth Estate, period.
You will get no strong argument here. Now, is the implication of what you've just said that you have a strong and perhaps even growing unease with the developments that you see before you today, and that there was some relationship between your desire to do the Murrow McCarthy program and what it is that you may be observing today with a smile on your face?
Well, I will say this. There are many, my father, as an anchorman, used to always say to me, he went at Carter because of I think he was arguing about the OPEC nations raising the price of gas, or there was some issue like that. He went at Gerald Ford for pardoning Nixon. The idea was not partisan. The idea was, as a journalist, he felt that his job was to constantly, diligently challenge authority. Because the one thing we've learned over the history of time is that authority or government, unchecked and unchallenged, always corrupts, without exception, always. And to him it was his sworn duty, even if it was someone he liked, which happened to be a lot. I find that there was, and it happens every once in a while, I found that there were some lapses, I think. The New York Times wrote a piece apologizing about not really questioning enough about the weapons of mass destruction. I think it's interesting that most of those were Judith Miller's articles, and she's in jail. She should never go to jail for not revealing her sources, but maybe for a couple of those stories. Her relationship with Ahmed Chalabi, but I don't want to get into that. No, but it is it's like you said, it is for me, I found that there were dangerous, it's tough. Again, I'll say this, I came out as publicly, I didn't hold press conferences, but I'd get interviewed and they'd say, what do you think about this? And I'd say, I think we should ask a few more questions before we send 150,000 kids in to get shot at. And I was put on the front of a magazine and called a traitor, and I'm a big kid, I can take that. They're not burning me at the stake, and they're not bringing me in front of a House on Un-American Activities Committee, so we're evolving along the way. Now they're just a couple of people that are sort of unkind to me. I can take that. I'm a big kid. I deserve it if I'm going to speak up. But I found that we had a period of time where we lacked, and I say we as in the son of a journalist, and as I always found myself as, it was a big part of my life, we lacked some of the nerve to ask some of the questions that were most important to ask at a time that were the most important time to ask it. Some of it happened. Great journalism goes on nonstop. You can find it anytime you want to and go look for it. We're fractured now, harder. You go to the network that best represents your political view now, rather than sort of starting with the same facts. It's okay, that's fair enough too. I just found that there was a dangerous trend of not asking tough questions. Hard to ask them because you could be...
Dangerous trend now by contemporary journalists asking questions of authority?
I think not as much now. I find that nowadays it's been, with a little bit of distance and the ability to not be characterized as unpatriotic. Tons of sites that called me, why do you... I went to a party at my friend Jerry Weintraub's house who's, filled with, Republicans, a lot of whom are my friends, and a guy was like, why do you hate America? And I'm like, it's my country, right or wrong. And I thought, well, my country, right or wrong, and blacks are sitting in the back of the bus and women aren't voting and we're still in Vietnam, my country, right or wrong. The theory of our country is to constantly, diligently question authority. That's why we left King George. It's not just your right, it's your duty. And so that's to me why this was, to me, the most important world was journalism. And
so
it's
that
always been.
You chose to use the Murrow-McCarthy confrontation as the vehicle through which you would express or try to express this underlying concern.
Well, I will say this. You guys have read or know the speeches as well as anybody. When you hear those speeches, you cannot help but feel patriotic. He is the most, he is a patriot and he is a brilliant writer. And why he is so brilliant is because it was always on constitutional issues. All the people who want to rewrite history and say that McCarthy was right about the communists and Murrow was wrong missed the point. Murrow never once defended any of those people as not being communist. He always said, you will note that the senator nor this reporter know whether or not Annie Lee Moss is or is not a communist. We demand that she has the right to face her accuser. It is our constitutional right. It's our writ of habeas corpus.
Grant, do you feel that you were part and party to the civics lesson that we have just gotten from George Clooney?
Sorry.
Well, I've known George and his father for so long that I've been indoctrinated for years.
He drank the potion.
No, it's interesting, you know, when you're writing this stuff, we had discussions when we would be working on speeches or we would read a speech and we would, you know, there was no way you couldn't make a parallel for today, but we certainly didn't set out. That wasn't the purpose of the piece. It really was to explore the idea of entertainment, you know, the news versus entertainment and how that plays out. And everything else was gravy. And it you know.
But you could have chosen 1,000 other subjects aside from McCarthy to do that.
We could have.
Yes, we could have.
I mean,
But that would have been too easy.
Yeah, but that would have been wrong.
That would have been wrong. But you know, yeah, well, never mind. You're right.
David, did you feel that you were part of a kind of crusade when you were doing this movie?
Not really. It's no. Sure, the air was thick with it, but you know, any attempt to make your art or make a artistic statement is going to tread upon things that everybody in some part of their life will experience. Mm-hmm. And it's always a crusade. Mm-hmm. I hate that word, except it is you make a blind charge with your vision up here and your hope back here and hopefully a bunch of friends with you to achieve that blend of, or that dovetailing of an artistic entertainment or something compelling enough to capture our imaginations, and along with that, you educate, you illuminate, you even inspire. And that's what we felt like every day, is we were learning something. We were inspired by Murrow and George and Grant's vision, and we had a lot of hope that at least we would succeed in making it something that people would entertain as an idea and as an artistic thing. Sure, it felt like a crusade, but most of the time it just felt like
lung cancer.
Lung cancer.
That was an amazing thing. Everyone was smoking. Everyone was
Not Fred.
smoking.
He didn't smoke, thank God, because I can't smoke.
Yeah, that's the only reason George didn't do Edward R. Murrow, is because he didn't want to smoke.
That is true. You know how on if you get on a soundstage, if you guys are ever on a soundstage, you know you can't smoke at all. And usually the lunch break, there'll be a crowd of about 8 guys standing outside smoking. This was the only set you've ever seen where there'd be 30 people standing outside like. They go, let's go back in. Like, look like Gary, Indiana, on the inside of it. I can
Grant,
say
did
that
you
it's
have
been some time.
in the back of your mind that when you were doing this movie, Good Night and Good Luck, which everybody knows is the way in which Murrow would end his commentaries, that you were trying to send a message perhaps to the White House, to the president?
No. You know, when we wrote this, we didn't know who the president.
Got his lines right there.
We didn't know who the president was going to be when we wrote this.
You wrote this last year?
Wrote it about 15 minutes ago. We were writing it last year in the middle of the. We were finishing it last year in the middle of the election. Sure. We were fairly sure who the president was going to be.
So
that's because I'm.
touch and go.
So tell me, so did you have George Bush in mind when you were thinking of the heart and soul of this movie?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. The thought had crossed our mind. We'd had discussions about that, but it certainly, as I said, the bigger discussions were really about the state of news. You know.
Well, what is the state of news in your judgment? Think it's a good, healthy enterprise at this time?
What do you think?
No, I ask the questions.
You know,
I go to a
Switch
master.
it around. We'll do it.
I want to go to a master. I
I'd
want to go
tell
to
you.
a man who did it, who's done it right for
No,
so long.
we'll switch it around.
I think I think that we, the viewing public, get the news that we deserve.
That's an interesting idea.
We get the news that we ask for.
Picking up George's point that people turn to networks that have the point of view that they like.
Yeah,
they feel
Bob
comfortable
Schiefer
with.
talked about that once, where he said it's
Yeah.
so fractured that you'll go.
Right.
Used to be you started with 3 networks, and basically you got the same information.
Right.
And you took it home, and you had your own social and political views, and you sort of digested it, and you came up
Right.
with your own opinion.
Right.
And now you go to the place that basically reinforces your belief system. So the fact base are very different. You know, if you call my aunt and uncle right now, they would swear to you that Saddam Hussein was attached to 911 and was attached to Al-Qaeda, and those are facts. I don't think they're facts myself, but that's because I watched other things or read other things. I think people don't read as much, and I think that's a little dangerous. Not to be knocking broadcast news, but I think it's also good to read a little bit along the way. I think the news is out there for you to get. You can still find it. That's the beauty of it. It is out there.
Absolutely, but it takes work.
It takes a little more work, and that may be good and it may be bad. You know, I think there's going to be a point in our history. It is cyclical, where we're going to turn around and go, I really want to know some real information. It's important right now. You find when serious things happen, people go back to the things that they trust the most.
I can't resist then. This kind of a movie, which certainly is going to stimulate people. Those who watch it will be stimulated to think important thoughts, yes. But then you get to a kind of bottom line question. How many people at the end of the day do you think are going to watch this? And how many people at the end of the day will be watching Ocean's 12, for example?
Well, Ocean's 12 is a bad example.
All right, how about 11?
Ocean's 11. Let's leave Batman and Robin out completely.
You know what I'm getting
No,
at here.
but of course. But, you know, let's say this. One episode of a failed WB network show will get more people watching it than most major films, you know. The truth is, television obviously hasn't, it's not even comparable, the kind of power, you know, that television has. So a film like this, it's not designed to be a huge hit. What it's designed to do is to be a debate for some people, to inspire a couple of people if they want to be inspired, to, you know, listen, if out of this movie, some kid at Columbia University, where you know, Fred was so proud to be a part of, if some kid watches this film and says, you know what, I'd like that, and I like those set of standards, and does it, and gets involved, we win.
You absolutely do. No question about that. We've got about 10 more minutes, and for those of you who'd like to ask a question, I am wide open to do so right here. Please identify yourself. Is there a microphone around that we...
I'll yell it out if you'd like.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, as a former broadcaster, I should have a voice. My name is Frances Harden. I'm a graduate of the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia. Fred was one of my professors. First, let me say, I thought the film was wonderful. I thought your portrayal...
No, you got to ask a question.
The film was wonderful. I want to ask you about your portrayal of Fred. All of us who know Fred know that he was a big guy, big hands, big feet, big voice, big ideas.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a looker.
That's right, baby.
What?
So
What are you saying?
I do want to ask you about how you decided to portray Fred and why.
Well, there was it was, you know, believe it or not, it was an economic decision. It was a $7.5 million black and white film starring David Strathairn. No one would give us the money.
I'm going to take that.
So I had to play. No. Oh, listen. The simple point is, black and white alone is impossible to finance. So for me, being in it was one way to get it financed and to do it for a buck. But I also found that I didn't want to do Fred because Fred takes over a room. I met him when he gave me a little version of the Constitution in 1982 when I was a kid, and I still have it. He took over a room, and to me, what was really important in this film were the words, and these words. And what was important was not to lose focus. So I thought the camaraderie between Fred and Ed was important, and I thought we did that very well. But I didn't want Fred to be what he actually was, which was the scene stealer, in a way.
Very much so.
Yeah, he would take over.
Very much so.
And I thought that would be a disservice to the film.
And
I wanted to play a Jew.
I'd never done that.
I'd never done that, and I thought it was a stretch.
When we were doing before we'd started, I got a call from David Friendly, who's
Right.
Fred's son, and we were talking, and he was thrilled that we were doing the film and all that, and he said, "So, is George really playing my father?" And I said, "Yes," and it was a long silence, and he said, "Have you guys ever seen my father?"
That's wonderful.
Don Hewitt was really happy Grant was playing him, though. That was well. He was like, "Grant, oh yeah, I know."
Yeah, he's a big fan of mine.
Okay. Yes, please. Yes.
Hi. First of all, I'm Tommy Lawn, and welcome to the club. We're glad to have you part of the
Good to
club.
be here.
I've been covering the White House since '68, and this is a very managed White House. It really is. The only people get called on are the top networks, or the really rich people who get to cover the president, follow the president all the time. Do you see any way around it? We are getting tougher, but not tougher.
Okay, first thing is you to the back. That seems to be the right way, isn't it? Isn't that how you handle it? Tough question, you to the back. I don't know. I mean, listen, you've got a man here who you could ask that question of. I'm not the man to ask that question. I am an observer of the fights that my father fought, and I found that in many ways he lost those fights over periods of time. I just always considered diligence. I think that the reporters saw a weak spot in Hurricane Katrina and found a way to get in. I think it's too bad that weak spot wasn't sort of picked on when it wasn't so easy. That's the thing that was so stunning to me about Murrow was he did it when it wasn't easy. He stuck his neck out when, although all of those people that he was working with were risking their jobs and their careers, Murrow had a much bigger understanding of the idea that if he shot too high and missed, he was going to saddle the country with McCarthy for another 5 years. He knew that, and he understood that. And for all of his writings, you get that. So, to me, the people who were in this room, who were there, the people who were writing at the time, it was one of the bravest things I've ever seen done. And brave on Paley's part, brave on everyone's part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm a graduate of the journalism school, and I was speaking to Mr. Strathern earlier and questioning about, you mentioned Johnny Walker, and my understanding about Mr. Murrow, being a student of, having studied a little bit about him, was that he kept a bottle of scotch at his feet so that when he was doing See It Now, he would take a nip before the broadcast, and that was not portrayed.
I never saw that.
You did not.
No, I never saw that.
Were you in the booth?
No, I never saw that, but Murrow was always extremely anxious when he broadcast, by the way, and he perspired terribly. And very often in the midst even of a radio program, in other words, where it was not important how he looked, he had a towel right there, and he would wipe himself periodically. Because I never understood that because he had done so many broadcasts. He was so totally in command of all of his material. And yet he perspired terribly the minute he had to do something on air. The minute he was communicating information, he suddenly realized, whoops, this is a very large responsibility. But, you know, why it is that he perspires so much, God alone knows. I don't know. There was somebody in the back. Yes, please.
Yeah, George, I'm curious. He spake.
No, hang on a sec. It's this lady right here. Yes.
I'm a Columbian Journalism School graduate, but I'm also Palestinian, and I'm a journalist here, an Arab American, an Arab journalist here. And I was wondering, because a lot of the stuff that was happening there with communists, it almost, same thing almost seems to happen with people who are Muslim or Arab. And it seems to be that, when you were talking about, when in the movie they talked about communists and they were looking at them, they were like, make sure you're not a communist, you have no connection to communists before you can say what you can say. And it seems to me like that's almost the same that's happening to a lot of Muslims and Arabs. Make sure you have no connection before you can say it's the fact that you are or are not rather than your constitutional right. And my question is, in the movie and in a lot of the discussions, you seem to mention Judith Miller and American, white American journalists and their rights. But also, I was wondering if you think about the idea of people who are not necessarily white Americans who are getting their rights threatened, but rather people who are more difficult.
There's a couple of things you threw in there, and look, the argument is obviously Jose Padilla in Guantanamo Bay. That's the best argument you can make, and that sort of goes back to what Murrow talks about when he talks about you cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. The question is, and again, it's not black and white, it's always complicated, because he would say we have to find a balance between protecting the state and the rights of the individual. So you go, okay, well, there's Jose Padilla, we go to the Supreme Court with it. And the truth is, he might be a terrorist, we don't know. But either he's a criminal and he gets the writ of habeas corpus, and he gets the right to a speedy trial and a lawyer, or he is a prisoner of war and he gets Geneva Convention rights. If you get neither of those, then you are chipping away at the foundation of what it is that designed democracy. So you're right, there are certainly parallels to all of those sort of arguments about it not being about white America. There are just, but the problems are, of course, so what do you do? Set them free. And so there aren't easy black and white issues. They, in my mind, are, because I'm an old-time constitutionalist that believes in going...
Strict constitutionalist?
Not strict in the Supreme Court strict constitutionalist kind of way, but I do believe in the... Did something just bad happen? I do believe in that over anything else. I do believe that that's the most important issue. But it's a good question. I mean, you're right. It's going to continue, too. It's not going to get better.
We are plumb out of time, and I'm sorry that other people I know wanted to ask questions. But we will receive a final benediction now from the president of the RTNDA.
Right.
Barbara Cochran.
First of all, you're all invited to go back across the hall where we have the reception and enjoy some dessert and coffee.
And booze.
And I don't know about that.
Johnny Walker, Black Label.
I don't know about that.
Secondly, I have some tokens here for each of you.
Some
mementos of Edward R. Murrow that I hope will be meaningful to you, including that postage stamp I mentioned.
Oh, you included?
Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't do nobody any good. Is this a speech?
This is a paper speech.
David speech.
And let's just give another round of applause.
Thank you, because it's a great joy to be here with you guys, and what an honor to be standing next to you. Truly an honor.